Some weeks move quietly, nothing collapses. Nothing announces itself as a breakthrough, yet something begins to shift beneath the surface. Perspective softens, assumptions loosen, and a different kind of clarity begins to form. Not the clarity that comes from certainty, the clarity that comes from recognizing how much we do not yet see. Last week opened with Hexagram 38, changing to Hexagram 8. Opposition moving toward holding together. At first glance, these two conditions appear incompatible. Opposition suggests difference, different perspectives, different interpretations, different conclusions about the same situation. Holding together suggests unity. But the movement from 38 toward 8 revealed something more subtle. Unity does not begin with agreement. It begins with clarity. Throughout the week, it became increasingly clear that not every difference required correction. Not every perspective needed to be brought into alignment. Some tensions simply revealed where people were standing. Once those positions were visible, the pressure to resolve them began to soften. The week unfolded through restraint rather than confrontation. Boundaries appeared first. Energy became more deliberate. Instead of reacting immediately, attention moved toward what actually mattered. Small signals began to carry more weight than dramatic gestures. Tone mattered. Timing mattered. The way something was said mattered as much as what was said. Gradually, illumination followed. Situations that once felt confusing became easier to see. Motives clarified. Assumptions that had quietly shaped perception began to loosen. This illumination did not demand action. It invited honesty. As that honesty deepened, relationships and roles naturally came into focus. What belonged to you became clearer. What did not belong to you also became easier to recognize. Once that internal alignment was established, friction began to appear. Obstacles surfaced, but the response to those obstacles changed. Instead of pushing harder, the wiser movement was pause. Reconsider the direction. Reconsider the timing. Reconsider whether engagement was necessary at all. In several situations, distance proved more intelligent than confrontation. Restraint preserved clarity. Space allowed tension to settle on its own. When we look back at the entire sequence, a pattern becomes visible. Restraint led to observation. Observation led to illumination. Illumination clarified relationships. And once those relationships were understood, some tensions resolved simply through distance. This entire movement reflects the arc from opposition toward holding together. Opposition reveals difference. Holding together emerges later through integrity. Unity built through pressure fractures quickly. Unity built through clarity forms slowly, but it endures. This week opens with Hexagram 19, changing at line 2, moving to Hexagram 24. Approach moving toward return. Hexagram 19 describes a moment when distance begins to close. Energy that once felt separated begins to move closer again. Communication becomes possible. Understanding begins to reopen. But approach is not aggressive expansion. It is the gradual movement of influence. Something that once stood far away now begins to draw nearer. Trust rebuilds slowly. Conversations that once felt blocked begin to soften. Yet the success of approach depends entirely on the quality of conduct within it. The second line clarifies this condition. Approach at line 2 succeeds because it is sincere. There is no manipulation in this position. No attempt to force agreement. No attempt to shape outcomes through pressure. Instead, there is steadiness, presence without agenda. Approach becomes powerful when sincerity replaces strategy. When someone shows up without trying to control what the moment will produce, influence grows naturally under those conditions. But when approach becomes assumption, misunderstanding returns quickly. This is why the movement continues into Hexagram 24, return. Return represents the quiet turning point of a cycle. After movement outward, energy begins to move back toward its origin. Return does not describe retreat from progress. It describes correction, a moment when the path realigns with what is authentic. In nature, this movement is constant. The seasons return. Breath returns after it is released. Light returns after darkness. Human situations follow the same rhythm. When conversation drifts away from sincerity, return restores honesty. When effort becomes excessive, return restores balance. When misunderstanding accumulates, return restores clarity. Approach and return together describe a week of progression, but this progression is quiet. It does not arrive through conquest. It arrives through alignment. Influence grows when sincerity remains present. Connection becomes possible when humility remains intact. The danger of this moment is subtle. When conditions begin to improve, the mind quickly fills the space with expectations. Stories form, predictions form, assumptions form. We begin to believe we understand more than we actually do. Return interrupts that impulse. It reminds us that clarity unfolds gradually. The path corrects itself step by step. Approach invites openness. Return invites patience. Together, they describe a week where progress is possible, but only when sincerity remains steady. Movement forward is available, but it must remain rooted in humility. Otherwise, the cycle simply repeats itself. Progression, then, is not driven by force. It is guided by sincerity, and sincerity allows the path to reveal itself one step at a time. The deeper reflection for this week comes from the Tao Te Ching, Chapter 71. Not knowing is true knowledge. Presuming to know is a disease. First realize that you are sick. Then you can move toward health. The master is her own physician. She has healed herself of all knowing. Thus, she is truly whole. This chapter speaks directly to the discipline of humility. To know that we do not fully know protects us from error. When we assume certainty too quickly, misunderstanding begins to spread. This teaching adds an important layer to the movement of this week. Approach invites connection. Return invites correction. Both of these movements require humility. Without humility, approach becomes pressure. Without humility, return becomes resistance. But when humility is present, something different happens. Curiosity replaces judgment. Listening replaces assumption. Space appears where conflict once seemed inevitable. Chapter 71 reminds us that wisdom does not come from accumulating answers. It comes from remaining aware of what we have not yet understood. That awareness creates a form of stability. We move more slowly. We speak more carefully. We recognize that every situation contains more complexity than at first appears. In that posture, mistakes correct themselves more easily. Relationships regain balance. Clarity deepens naturally. The Tao therefore teaches that progression does not come from certainty. It comes from sincerity. Approach opens the door. Return restores the path. And humility protects the movement between them.